So firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone that's joined from the US, from India, from the UK, around Europe and elsewhere. Welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be moderating today's session. The Indian news is reporting today that an Indian colonel and 2 soldiers were killed last night in a violent face-off with Chinese soldiers in Ladakh, in a massive escalation at a time when there are efforts to diffuse weeks of tension at the border. India had apparently retaliated and there were casualties on both sides, according to the army. Army sources say that soldiers were not shot, but were killed in a physical fight on Indian territory that involved stones and batons. So that's the context of this morning's news. So today's session is a really important one in that context. And I'm really delighted to have a wonderful panel joining us. A little bit of an introduction to Bridge India. We are a think tank that's about 1.5 years old. We are based in London. London's our first office, with others opening up in Europe later in the year. COVID notwithstanding. The objective of Bridge India is to help the Indian diaspora across Europe, as well as other businesses, better understand the nuances of Indian public policy, to be able to present both sides of the argument and build a better understanding of India from a 360-degree perspective. Over the last couple of months, during COVID times, we've had 12 webinars so far, and we've had more than 1,000 unique viewers on Zoom signing up, and nearly 60 speakers. And so we've been pretty busy. Our next couple of sessions are on food security in India, where we've got our keynote speaker from Niti Aayog, India's government sector think tank. And then after that, we've got a session on how successful India's cultural diplomacy is across the world. And that's with the current Director General of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations and others as well. The format today will be that I'll ask each of our panelists to give some opening comments. Then we'll get into a moderated discussion. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat that you see directly below where it says Q&A. Please also tweet at us. Our Twitter handle is @bridgeindia.org. We're also on Facebook and we're also on YouTube. So we're live on Facebook Live right now, but after the session, later on today or tomorrow, we'll also be uploading this on YouTube. Brief introduction to our speakers. In no particular order, we've got Matthew Henderson, who's Director of Asia Studies at the Henry Jackson Society in London. Following 8 years of Chinese studies at Cambridge, Beijing, and Oxford universities, Matthew joined the Foreign Commonwealth Office in 1986. His career in the diplomatic service was mainly spent working on East Asia. After leaving the FCO in 2015, his research interests increasingly focused on the rise of China and its geopolitical and geoeconomic impact. Then we have Manoj Kewalramani, who's a fellow of Chinese studies at the Takshashila Institution. He's worked at leading news organizations, managing digital news operations. He's been in charge of creating multimedia content, text, video, infographics. And of course, he's written extensively on political and strategic affairs. All these roles have included being an executive producer at WION, a senior news producer at NewsX, and a senior editor of digital at CCTV. Then we have Andrew Cainey, who's a co-founder and senior partner at Asiability Limited. He's an experienced senior advisor with a demonstrated history of working in Asia, that's China, Korea, Singapore, and elsewhere, as well as Europe, with financial institutions, companies, and governments on investments, on strategy, and on policy. He graduated from Harvard Business School. He's proficient in Mandarin, French, and German. He's a non-exec director at one of Schroders funds in Asia. He was an associate fellow at Chatham House, and he was also a partner at Tony Blair Associates. And before that, he was a managing director at Booz & Company. Last but not least, we have Partha Ghosh, who wasn't at Booz & Company, but he was at McKinsey. He was a partner there a little while ago. He is currently a professor at both MIT and Tufts University. He's a senior advisor to the consulting arm of the Economist Group. As I mentioned, senior partner of McKinsey earlier. He's also an adjunct professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and in terms of his educational background, he studied at MIT, both in chemical engineering after he was at IIT Kharagpur, and he did an MBA also at the Sloan School of Management. So we've got a stellar panel. And before we dive in, just a little bit of context. You will have seen this in the marketing messages that you signed up to. But US and Chinese foreign policy has for long been to embrace China's integration onto the world stage. But under President Xi, China has displayed greater assertiveness. Foreign Policy magazine said in May 2020, Xi Jinping's China is displaying a superpower's ambition. Only a few years ago, many American observers still hoped that China would reconcile itself to a supporting role in the liberal international order, or would pose at most a challenge to US influence just in the Western Pacific. But now, signs are that China's gearing up for a lot more to contest America's global leadership, and these ambitions are ubiquitous. The present phase of India-China relations has emerged from the desire and the imperative on both sides to reset relations after the Doklam standoff in 2017. And to some extent, the realization that despite the persistence of major differences between both parties, India and China have significant areas of cooperation, both in the bilateral and the multilateral arenas. There are strained ties with Washington and Beijing. Do these mean that Beijing is reaching more to New Delhi? Does that mean New Delhi is looking to embrace this, even though it won't get assurances that China will avoid a confrontational posture under different circumstances in the future? Today's issues at the border being a prime example of that. We had an earlier session on how South Asia views China just a few weeks ago that Matthew also was a speaker on. We touched largely on One Belt, One Road and associated initiatives. So today's session builds on that. How can India position itself versus China, that's already the largest economy in the world and flexing its muscles more and more? So I'm delighted to have you all join us. Can I ask, in terms of speakers, simply by the order that it appears on my screen, can I ask Andrew to go first with some initial comments, then Manoj, then Matthew, and then Partha.
Thank you, Pratik. I'll go right ahead then. And to taking this question, how does India position itself relative to a more assertive China? It needs the two sides. I'm going to say actually a lot of the time we spend looking at understanding China, we don't spend enough time understanding ourselves and what we want. And so in this situation, what India wants, a lot of the discussion gets very tied up in China's doing this, China's doing that, what should we do, rather than what we want to do. But firstly, as someone who knows much more about China than India, I think I should talk about China rather. And I think that the assessment of China does need to be based on a fairly nuanced and multidimensional understanding of where it is. Now, just in a few minutes, what I thought I would do is take a somewhat journalistic approach of what, who, why, how, when, where, to what is an assertive China, and start on some implications of what that could mean. Firstly, as you said, what an assertive China is a China that is, on some dimensions, the largest economy in the world, on some dimensions, the second, the most populous, and has a scale about it that I would say, well, why would you accept the liberal world order if you're China? You'd expect to shape it and create something. But it goes beyond the scale, it goes to an ambition about the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the Chinese people. It goes around actions, and we're talking about the border, but actions in different areas, and threatened actions or implicit actions or latent actions that by virtue of its scale and being there may come about. But it's also about what the Chinese call discourse power, which is the ability to shape the narrative globally about how the world works. What is the definition of human rights? Is it a Chinese definition or a Western definition? What should we do? And it's also what one might just call noise or bluster or bullying and antics of people who get up and say outrageous things in what's become known as wolf warrior diplomacy. the who of it, it's become much stronger under President Xi, but there were elements of this before, so it's not just President Xi. There's been a strengthening of the party leadership under Xi in a way that's now core to any discussion of what China is doing. But it's very important to remember that China is not a monolith. It's not one man at the center, however strong or at times weak that man may be. It is lots of individuals seeking to make a name for themselves, make money for themselves, get promoted, get good marks from their bosses. So I don't know the ins and outs of the border situation between China and India, but you can imagine various people wanting to show they're protecting China and showing fighting spirit and doing what might be quite counterproductive things in terms of their ambition. In terms of the why is China more assertive, I would start again with almost the why not, which is, well, if I'm going to be the largest country and economy in the world, why shouldn't I be assertive and get things my way? But there is a much more personal element to this, which is the Xi Jinping. It's to demonstrate or why he should be in power. It's to create a legacy, and it's to avoid being toppled from power. Just equally for the party to remain in power, to deliver to the Chinese people what the Chinese call legitimacy, performance legitimacy in their government, be it increased prosperity and a sense of pride. On to the sort of how, when, where. The how, what we've seen under Xi is a much greater integration between the economics and business world, the security perspective, and the values perspective, and an approach that says, how do I look in a very broad-ranging way at what is in China's interest and China's national security, and a willingness, therefore, to use economics, particularly economic relations and investment, as a means to coerce behavior elsewhere or to seek benefits and favor from elsewhere. But it's not that there's a detailed grand strategy that's being pursued. There's lots of improvisation, there's lots of competition between people trying to do a good job and seeing what works, which leads to this point about the need to push back. True pretty much of any human relations, but particularly with China. If you don't push back, they'll keep pushing. Back to what I said about identifying what it is that we, be it in Britain or in India or anywhere else, want out of this. Finally, on the when and where, well, when is it's now, it's short term, it's tactical, it's opportunistic, it's also midterm, it's also long term. And you see these discussions about the ambition for 2049 in China, but equally Chinese politics, as in I think politics everywhere, is short term, opportunistic, and looks at the situation. And finally, where, well, you know, it's everywhere. China, I remember meeting someone in China Friendship Association, who talked about how Andorra, this little country nestled between France and Spain, is a long-term, lifelong partner of the Chinese. So China is everywhere, which also I think pokes up one of the key areas to look at, which is the scope for partnerships. That everyone's wrestling with this question. Is it India? Is it Sri Lanka? Is it Vietnam? Is it the UK? We're all looking at how do we act as regards to an assertive China. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Anuj?
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew. I think you've painted that picture of an assertive China, which I think I can take from. I think, Pratik, when you sent us the set of questions, I mean, I was thinking about them and trying to answer them individually. And then I realized that, you know, as the day's events took over today, I thought, you know, this is a good point of time to sort of take what's happened today and contextualize that in terms of the broader India-China relationship. I think the first point that I wanted to make in terms of, you know, Pratik, you spoke about the sort of competition between the US and China. I think that plays a role in terms of the India-China dynamic, but it's also important to keep in mind that there is an inherent bilateral dynamic in this relationship, which is of friction, which is of also cooperation historically, but also significant friction, historical mistrust, a sense of balancing within the region. And I think that sort of exists with or without the US. The US is an added factor into that. I just want to sort of then start with what's happened today. So as a caveat, of course, I mean, information is still sketchy. We're still sort of getting in data as to what's happened. But what we do know is, like you said, there have been 3 fatalities on the Indian side. There have been some casualties on the Chinese side. None of these numbers are really specifically confirmed, so we'll still wait on that. And both of governments right now appear to be talking to each other at different levels. There's a military conversation going on. There's a diplomatic conversation going on behind the scenes that at least we've understood between the Indian ambassador and sort of diplomats in Delhi. And both governments are sort of stitching together a narrative on either side, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But until then, there are sort of 3 points that sort of come clearly out, right? The first is that in the short run, the developments over the last month or so, as the sort of standoff on the LAC began, they've created a new dynamic, particularly what's happened today. Over time, we've gotten used to this idea that on the LAC, on the sort of McMahon line, we're going to see scuffles, transgressions, incursions, and both sides will accuse each other of that. It's an uneasy sort of pattern, but it's a pattern that we seem to have gotten into. What's happened today breaks that pattern. The last time we had fatalities between India and China along the border, in an incident along the border, was in 1975 along Tulung line, Arunachal Pradesh. India back then had said that it was the Chinese who had ambushed an Indian patrol party and killing 4 soldiers. And the Chinese, like they have today, said that the Indian side had crossed over and opened fire. The only difference today is that there's been no opening of fire. There's been sticks and stones and iron rods, apparently. But the key sort of takeaway is that this is something new. We've not seen this in 45 years, which tells you that the pattern has been broken. The diplomatic, military, political leadership on both sides, for both of them, this is a new dynamic to take care of. So they will have to devise what Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon in India keeps calling for a new modus vivendi, in terms of how do you sort of contain this, because this will then alter also the understood conflict escalation matrix between the 2 sides. And I think this will require high level engagement and expending political capital on both sides. India, for the Indian political class, much more than for the Chinese, perhaps. So I think that's the one thing to take away, that this is a new context that we're now talking in after what's been reported today in the afternoon. The second thing is, I mean, I view what's been happening between India and China within the sort of broader picture of the simultaneous rise of both of these countries. Yes, there is a significant power asymmetry. China's economy is 5 times larger. China's military modernization has taken far greater pace than India's military modernization. And that's evident. I mean, you don't even need to go into details of that. Just look at the development of sea power in China and you'll see the difference. Yet what's also true is that there has been massive capacity development on both sides. While China has lifted some 800 odd million people out of poverty since 1979 and is on track to eradicate absolute poverty, what India has done with about 250 million people being lifted out of poverty since the reforms, it's significant, right? It's no mean feat. That's translated into economic power. That's also translated into military power as our economy has grown. And this translates on the ground. So in terms of the capacity improvement, in terms of infrastructure along the boundary, this can spark insecurity in itself, which some believe was what happened this time around in early May, late April and early May, when this current situation developed. Also, both sides with sort of global engagement economically, particularly sort of expanding, their circles of interest are coinciding far more. The South China Sea is important to India. A significant chunk of our trade passes through there, just like the Indian Ocean is important to China. So this leads to sort of new sources of friction amidst a scenario where the 2 sides already had deep, high-level political mistrust, which sort of goes back to the 1962 war and even before that. Now you place this particular cocktail within this current geopolitical flux that's prevailing, with the US-China relationship getting far more tensed, and you're going to see increased volatility between India and China in the future. And these are sort of structural factors which will be very difficult to contain. So the effort for both political leaderships would be to contain this. And why I argue that the effort should be to contain this is because, irrespective of how this current situation evolves, conflict does not serve the strategic interest of either side. Conflict between these 2 sides is not going to resolve the territorial dispute, and neither will victory in whatever way one can conceptualize victory. achieve the sort of strategic objective of a stable periphery and also sort of economic growth and development. And let's be clear, for all the rise, for all the talk about China's rise, there's much more to be done from Xi Jinping's perspective, from an economic point of view also. Yes, there is a window of opportunity to do many things right now, but even today, there's much more to be done from an economic perspective, from a point of view of improving livelihood and achieving those big goals that he sort of outlined, the first centenary goal and the second centenary goal going down to 2049. And that will require some degree of stability. Well, has he shown greater risk appetite? Yes. But does that mean that conflict is something that will serve his interest? At this point of time, I would doubt so. There are many sort of sore spots open for China right now. Secondly, it would need India for more reasons than one, particularly in the context of the Indian market. Increasingly we've seen Chinese investments in India. So you're likely to see much more of that, and that's sort of factoring into Chinese calculations also. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind because the Indian market is going to be a significant place for China. Now, putting all this into context in terms of what should the Indian approach therefore be, and how should India be conceptualizing its ties with China? I think we've made we've not done well in the past while we've tried to carve out a strategy, but we've not done well on specifics, particularly in the last couple of months. But broadly, from an Indian strategic point of view, I'd make sort of 3 points of how we need to be dealing with China going forward, what our approach should be, particularly in the context of COVID-19. The first thing that we need to do is we need to look inward. We need to firstly deal with the health challenges, the public health challenge that COVID has presented. It's not just a human cost that's imposed on us, but it's also from an economic point of view, there's a massive cost on India right now. And we need to be working towards addressing that on priority. The objective of our foreign policy also should be to get our economy working again, to be creating those jobs, to be addressing livelihood challenges and challenges of poverty. That's essentially what's going to be sort of the backbone of Indian strength, even in global affairs going forward. So we need to get that done. I certainly hope you spoke about Atmanirbhar Bharat in some of the questions that you sent to me. I certainly hope it doesn't devolve into some form of import substitution or autarky. At present, it doesn't seem so, but then we're not really clear about what it means right now, because it means quite a few different things. But fundamentally, instead of looking inward, we need to look towards external engagement, towards external sort of economic engagement, expanding our trade. And that's sort of important for us. I mean, nearly half of India's sort of GDP is comprised of, external engagement, our foreign sort of trade in merchandise, goods and services. So we need to be looking to do more of that. And the pandemic gives India some opportunities to sort of make certain changes in terms of what the traditional hurdles in this context were, whether it was regulation with regard to being more investor friendly, whether it was regulation with regard to land acquisition, whether it's with regard to poor infrastructure. This is an opportunity to actually look outward, attract capital, invest in infrastructure. Second, very quickly, I think we need to focus on deepening our engagement with China. We've tried this and we've struggled with this, right? Wuhan and Mahabalipuram were sort of attempts at this. I think we need to have far more structured engagement with China. This informality, and I've argued this in the past also, I think it was good post Doklam because you needed something at the high level, which was a free-flowing dialogue. But I think we need to move towards a far more structured dialogue. We need to rethink what we have done with regard to BRI. We need to rethink what we have done with regard to the recent note on FDI. We need to rethink some of the choices that we've made, which one can see why Beijing would view that as problematic. But we need to rethink all of this in a pragmatic sense, right? Because at the end of the day, if it benefits India, it benefits India, whatever label one may want to give it. And lastly, the sort of point that I wanted to make was from a broader geopolitical perspective in the context of this great game that's, whether you call it a new Cold War or something else between China and the US, we need to look at it, we need to sort of go back to our sort of past and think of it not as falling in one camp or the other. That doesn't necessarily serve our interests. We need to think of our foreign policy in terms of falling in different tents which are based on certain issues as opposed to falling in certain camps. Critics will call this non-alignment 3.0 or 4.0. I don't know how many versions of non-alignment we've had, but it still serves our interests. We can work with China on climate change. We can work with China on multilateralism, wherever it serves our interests. But we will also need to balance in different ways. So we need to sort of work with different players, and we need to expand our scope for maneuver within the environment, whether it's with China or other middle powers. And that, I think, should be the sort of grand overarching vision that we should have. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll end with that.
Thank you, Manoj. Matthew?
Oh, after such fluent and masterly evocation of the entire gamut of what's going on, I'm going to keep my comments quite sharp. As we all know, India and China's difficult relationship has its roots in a very specific historical context. But it is also part of what I do believe is an emerging wider clash of global cultures, which is not, I think, the same as saying camps. I do believe that the rules-based international order is now challenged by an unaccountable party-state revisionism, whose explicit objective is to surpass and overthrow the West and the world of liberal and democratic values, which are espoused by Britain and India. I think we need to look at the People's Republic of China in this light, as a party state, where we are not talking about China, but about the Chinese Communist Party, who claim to represent the Chinese people and justify their legitimacy for many of their actions by preserving the integrity or the feelings or something or other of the Chinese people. But as we've seen in COVID-19, that has not been the case, and I believe never really has been. This party believes in permanent struggle, conflict, at home and abroad. That is a fundamental Leninist tendency, which is explicitly stated in their famous document number 9. And it carries it out through a policy called unrestricted warfare. Uncomfortable for us who believe in peace, but true. This is why we are baffled by what appear to be inconsistencies. On the one hand, reaching out with gifts and friendship and medical support, and on the other, stirring up dangerous border conflict. But there is no inconsistency within the context of unrestricted warfare. That is standard operating procedure. Davos win-win was a facade, and the reality is actually that zero sum. The CCP does not have bilateral allies or multilateral family. States, third-party states, are either rivals or clients, or rivals who are slowly being turned into clients. The CCP is brilliant at divide and conquer, not least because the rest of us are so poor at unite and protect. That was my first point. My second point concerns going forward. Communist China has basically run out of road. It may not look like it. Manoj was very strong on naval expenditure and so on. But basically the economic model is tanking and has been for years before COVID-19 dealt what might be a death blow. The demographics are terrible. Creativity and individual thought is a threat to the party, not something to be used. The tiger is out of the bag with their lying about the second China-originated pandemic, and they have peaked too soon. By contrast, India has vast potential, a very favorable demographic, many difficulties, not least of which is getting the better of COVID-19, but many really good traditional and new friends and trading partners all around the world. It's not a camp, it's a group of people with common interests. And here Andrew's point was very strong. What are our real interests in this? The world, as Andrew said, is tired of being snarled at by wolf warriors and beaten with both sticks and carrots into some unhappy state of submission to the CCP. India is a major force in the free world of liberal democracy, which China threatens. There is a time for caution, and there's a time for courage and convictions. Quads and Quad Plus are ways forward. Let's all work together in defense of what keeps us free.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Matthew. Partha?
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm from Boston. I was absolutely thrilled to hear the 3 point of views. Obviously, as you could sense, they're quite different. And I think I come out somewhere in the middle, perhaps a different dimension. So firstly, my heart goes out to those people, both sides of the border, China and India, who have lost their lives. Obviously, that is highly unwelcome, but that's how life is, and we have to find ways to create a new world. It's also my hope that in the audience, we have people from the 3 countries, because we are talking about US, we are talking about India, we are talking about China. I was very glad to hear that Andrew has spent a lot of time in China, as I have, both China and Japan. So I'll try to bring a bit of a different perspective into this discussion. You know, I recall when I used to live in Japan between 1980s till almost mid-90s, there was a similar feeling of the West towards Japan. Japan is taking over the world. Japan is not following the rules. Not realizing that after the war, Japan from being nothing came out to become a major power in the world. Japan introduced about 100 brand names in a span of 15 years between 1960 and 1975. Now, we see the same thing in China, that China has to be appreciated for what it has achieved. From 1950, when I plot GDP per capita, India is to look slightly richer. One was $110, the other one was $100. Today, China is significantly richer. It has rightly gained the old glory that it used to enjoy. And it wants to go farther because per capita basis is about $15,000. United States is $50,000. United Kingdom is $38,000. So obviously there's a long way to run. So China has to serve its own interest and is doing extremely well. And we should appreciate China for what it has achieved, as opposed to being critical. Now, where the West has to wake up, West always have expressed a little bit of discomfort when countries from Asia has come into prominence. You know, it's Lee Kuan Yew. I remember a meeting I had with Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore and also with Mahathir. And he used to make the same point. Both of them used to make the same point that, look, as countries in the East rise, the biggest challenge they would face, they would be judged through the Western lens. And that is the first fundamental problem. That US may have a political system, economic system which works, which is currently not working, unfortunately. That doesn't mean the whole world has to adopt the same system. Now, China has evolved a system which is working for Chinese people. I know a lot of people from China, my students at MIT, they come from very humble backgrounds. Unlike India, the top 10% of India moves around the world. In China, the bottom 20% moves around the world, and that's the difference. So I think first, if India wants to benefit from Chinese success, it should not look at China as a competitor, forget what's happening in the world. How to learn from China, which India has failed in last 70 years. We have to recognize that India has not been able to deliver socioeconomic progress to the bottom 70% of the country. And somehow we tend to neglect that. We try to believe that China is at par with India, India is par with China. That it used to be in 1950. It is no longer the same game. So I think when we talk about that if US-China relationship is getting hurt, what does it mean for India? That's, I think, the wrong way of posing the problem. That means if I'm not your friend, so I can become your friend. It's that, something like that. We are living in a world where we have to think of a plus-sum game as opposed to a zero-sum game. And if I look between China, India, and United States, suppose the whole world was made out of these three countries. Today, India has got much more to benefit from China than from the United States. Why? Because the Chinese experience of the last 50 years is more relevant from India, where India is economically today, than the experience of the United States in the last 50 years. Now, if I go back 200 years, yes, maybe between Abraham Lincoln and 1914, the First World War, that experience of the United States when US basically fighting between North and South became a major world power by this First World War is a great experience. Maybe we should study that period and see what does it mean for India. Or study the last 30 years of China or the last 50 years of Japan and ask what does it mean. So I think India has to do much more homework. The way Bridge India has positioned the question as if India and China are in the same league. They're not. You know, India is still playing in the minor league and China has moved into the Premier League. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And that's where Indian politicians have often gone wrong. They view that they become major powers. They feel 200 million people speak English. That's why they should be respected around the world. But that's not the case, because if you look at the successful countries, None of them speak English. Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan. They're successful because they bring value to the global markets. They produce products which people buy. Now, today, when we talk about self-reliance was the formula of India during the Nehru time. Between 1950s all the way till about 1970s, mid-70s, till Rajiv Gandhi came into power. It did not work. Then we opened up with the hope it will work. It did not work. So the fundamental question when we talk about India, we have to ask why none of the formulas are working. Why do we keep oscillating from one end of the pendulum to the other end? It's like a pendulum. And we are continuously experimented at the cost of the bottom 70% of the people. So I think that is the question I would like to see we debate, that what could India do differently? India has to shape up and then decide how to work with China, how to work with the United States, how to work with Europe, how to work with Africa, and India doesn't have a strategy. One question was raised, does China have a strategy? Having been to China many, many times, so I think I first visited China just after it opened up in the early 80s. And since then, I've perhaps made about 100 trips from Japan, from the United States. And what I did notice that there was a systematic progress. In India, it has been a random progress. And if we take 5 steps forward, 10 steps backward. And that's not working. So I think that's how I would like to position the discussion, that how do we engage with the world so that India could be a better learner. We have to learn before we can give. We have to absorb before we can share, and then shape the economy in a fashion that people would come. I think today is very difficult for me to justify if I'm helping Apple, who happens to be a client, or helping Intel, who happens to be a client, from China to look into India. I've got nothing to offer. The infrastructure is not working. The people are not trained. Even the management is not trained. We speak very well, but if you look at the excuses I hear from top management of companies in India versus excuses from Japan and China, the gap is almost 10 to 1. It's very easily we develop excuses, and that doesn't work. In today's global supply chain, we have to be just on time. And how many meetings in India start on time? How many times you have gone to India where you were told that come to me and visit me at 10 o'clock, and the guy strolls into his office at 11 o'clock? And how could we say, how could we have the guts to say, let's look at China versus India because US-China relationship is not good? Have we earned that stature? And the other point, I will close by making the other point, that China-US relationship was never good. Nixon had to visit, they had a tough discussion with Mao Zedong. It was looked as a communist set of system. We don't like communism. We are capitalistic. They have to change the economic system. First, the US doesn't have the right what economic system another country chooses. No country has the right. But in the last 30 years, where people have invested? In China. Why? Because China delivers. In a Zoom, the products that I'm using right in front of me are all made in China. My phone is made in China. My iPhone is made in China. China's earned that. So I think we have to be very clear what is the problem that we are trying to solve. If it's a question of global harmony, I think we should have more people in the Chinese audience from China in the audience. And it's a question of what could India learn from China and United States, that's good. But to frame the question that because there's a tension, there's always been a tension. In fact, I remember once a chat I had with Sony's founder, Mr. Morita, and I was in a panel discussion very similar to this meeting where Japan was struggling with United States. They used to call trade friction. These days we use the word trade war. Those days the term was trade friction. And Mr. Morita made a very interesting point. He said friction is good, and he literally made this expression. Friction creates energy. The question is how to use the energy for positive purpose. So I think US and China should ask the question, how do we take the next step of relationship? And then India should ask, what could India learn? I think that's where I will stop. What could India learn?
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Partha. So most of you will have seen the polls that have been running over the last 20, 30 minutes. The last one, the answers are very interesting. There's a quote from Partha: India is still in the minor league. China is in the Premier League. To what extent do you agree? So 39% of you said completely agree, and 31% of you said agree to some extent. So there is some resonance with what Partha has said. And just keeping with the sense of what you've been talking about, Partha, you said that let's not worry about whether China has a strategy or not. India itself doesn't have a strategy. So I want to come back to Manoj on that. Last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of announcements on self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Is this the start of a new industrial strategy, or is this protectionism, or is this specifically a backlash by the Indian government against China? What's your view?
So my sort of first point of before I sort of answer the question, I wanted to actually make a point about. So I agree. I was among the lots who said that I somewhat agree with what Partha has said, but I would sort of. It's a leap to go from asymmetry to inconsequential. There is a deep asymmetry between India and China, and I sort of acknowledge that. But India is not inconsequential. It's a significant power in its own right. I sort of agree with the broad point that Partha made, which is that the objective of our foreign policy, as of anything else that we do, has to be about transforming the lives of those hundreds of millions of Indians who have been deprived of development and opportunities. So with that sort of broad point, I agree. But I would say that India is consequential in world affairs, and it increasingly is so. Does that mean that we need to be arrogant to not learn from the Chinese or from the Americans? No, of course. You learn and you take opportunities wherever they come. As far as Atmanirbhar Bharat goes, look, when the Prime Minister laid out Atmanirbhar Bharat in his speech at 8 p.m., as he does so many things at 8 p.m. in the night, it ended up with a very confusing message in many which ways. He spoke about an India which is going to be deeply connected to the world, but also which is going to be self-reliant. To invest in sort of a big new industrial strategy, we need to attract capital. The capital is not going to be raised domestically. The capital is going to be raised internationally. So we will need to be connected. If you want to develop manufacturing growth, which is something that we've been bad at, and I mean, it's astounding to me how about, 5-7 years ago, if you spoke to, or maybe a little even further than that, if you spoke to people in India, they would tell you that, oh, we skipped the manufacturing phase and we directly went to the services phase, and how wonderful was that? Yet, we're now finding ourselves in a position that we need to invest in manufacturing because that's where the jobs are going to come from. And I think that's the sort of pivot that this government has been trying to make. Look, India is a complex country, different states, different regions, different political economy, and to sort of unshackle all of that is a challenging task. And it's not just a task that a central government or a union government can do. As far as Atmanirbhar Bharat goes, my sense is what the government wants to do is essentially continue what we were doing, which is trying to look at opportunities to create manufacturing centers in India. Whether it is companies exiting from China, so far we've not been successful in that. The biggest beneficiaries of companies exiting from China have gone to places like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia. We've not really gained significantly. I think that's a lot to do with fundamental factor market issues in India. We need to address those fundamental factor market issues. What we've seen amid the pandemic is some steps in that direction, although they've been fairly haphazard with state governments specifically sort of suspending labor laws and doing things like that. I think we need to have a much deeper conversation on what we need to do in India with regard to all of these things. In an 8 p.m. speech is not going to resolve that because this is linked to deeper sort of political economy issues in India. So I think I'd sort of hold my verdict on Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think the idea is correct. We need to get more manufacturing in India. We need to get more capital in India. Our foreign policy should be geared towards that. We need to rationalize our legislative frameworks, but we need to also carry domestic politics with that. And that's what I think this government has not done well so far. Perhaps once the sort of chaos of COVID ends, and one hopes that happens sooner rather than later, we'll probably be able to have a much more serious conversation about that. And that's what I'd be hopeful for.
Arthur, you wanted to come in?
Could I make a quick comment? Manoj, thank you very much. I was a bit afraid that you most probably would not agree with me, but I'm glad that you have agreed. You know, I recall a discussion. I was invited to give a talk in front of Rajiv Gandhi when he came to become the prime minister. And I recall in that crowd, but unfortunately he could not attend the meeting. So it was hosted by L.K. Jha, Ratan Tata, Abid Hussain, Montek Singh, and there was a host of the senior bureaucrats and politicians in the room. It was on September 6, 1986 in Ashok Hotel. I still remember that. The title of my talk was Marketing India in the 21st Century. And that time, I made the point which you just touched on, that my fundamental point, if I really extract, it was about 3-hour presentation, by the way. Those days I used transparencies there, was that India would need to develop a strategy, bottom up, top down, all inclusive. And during this period, India should close down, because when you have a party at your home, Manoj, you decorate your home, you put the frames in the right place, you clean up the dust, and then people come and they appreciate how beautiful the home is. I said, India has to get itself organized. When we look for foreign investment, people should feel good. It is not a journey from the New Delhi airport to Taj Man Singh Road hotel, or go to the North Block or South Block. That looks beautiful. But the rest of India doesn't. And if you really want to touch the Manipur or Nagaland or people in the South or the West or East, India has to get dressed up. So I think I agree with the very fundamental point you made, that India has to have a much deeper discussion. We are having superficial discussion. We react, you know, we was running out of money. We said, okay, we will open up the country. But opening up did not help export, it helped import. India's trade balance went negative to even more negative, because Indian businessmen has not been trained the way the Japanese, the Japanese would like to manufacture and export. China would like to manufacture and export. That needs hard work. But somehow Indian businessmen work ethos is not there, that I have to go into the factory, work with the workers to produce something which I can take to the world markets. So the need for a fundamental discussion, and that's why Bridge India should focus on, is extremely important. That how to help Indian business, academia, politician really get to the heart of the issues. And once we get there, then it becomes, okay, how do we play the game with China? How do we play with Japan or India or Pakistan? But now we do not have a play. We do not have a card. We have to design that card to play.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I just thought I will insert that.
Thank you, Peter. We've had a few questions and also comments coming through. We've got a couple of emails as well. I'll just read out some of the comments and then get to the questions. Mukesh Kumar from India says, my question is, our Prime Minister of India, respected Narendra Modi ji, said self-dependency. What would be the policy framework for attracting those companies in India? And how can we strengthen our special economic zone framework to compete with Chinese SEZs? That's a question from him. Prabhu Kulkarni from Ireland sent in some comments on email to say, we need to increase our army strength to the same level as China, about 2 million soldiers. Presently, we have no way to worry. We need only Sardar Patel type leader. And we've also had some comments coming in from Sumita Saha, Supriyo Chaudhary, Ibani Dhawan, and Siju as well. I want to just come to you, Andrew, with one of those questions. Ibani says, regarding Partha's point about India being in the minor league, could we not say this is due to the major inherent differences in governance style? China is more authoritative, and that's why it might have been easier in the short term for progress to happen, but surely that long-term bet has to be with democracy and with India.
I think that's the ongoing long-term debate around whether democracy will out versus authoritarianism and potential in the long run, which I think can become a bit abstruse, because I think more to Partha's point, I would say that there are lessons from that India, or indeed any country, can take from China within its own democratic framework, and we'll talk of India as a democracy, but there are different types and levels of democracy, and clearly challenges in India as there are, say, in Mongolia. I've worked in Mongolia, which is an incredibly vibrant and proud democracy, but has other challenges. Vietnam is not a democracy, but has had a very strong track record on the economic side and on the performance side. So I wouldn't make it a black and white democracy versus non. I also think in the China-India case, you've got a huge demographic distinction between where India is and where China is. China, to be clear, has had, and I saw the reactions around grand strategy, China has always had very clear objectives about what it wants to do. It wants to make people richer. Now wants to see the rejuvenation of the Chinese people. How that happens, the strategic choice for that has been much less top-down and directional. There's been lines set down, and then a lot of competition between special economic zones, between cities, between provinces, promotion of government officials based on the delivery of foreign direct investment targets, and so on. And those are not strikingly authoritarian in their measures. I mean, there are other issues happening in terms of freedom of speech. Purely on the economics, there's a lot of competition. There's been a lot of dynamism coming out of the private sector in China, which has been supported by local government, elements of supportive corruption. There's a new book out on this by a Michigan professor, Yuan Ang, China's Gilded Age, which is very good. So there are a bunch of things there that one can help look at to say, well, how could this apply in India? And I would very much support what Parth has said around, in some ways, the main challenge for India is how to do better. And look everywhere for that. Just steal, beg, borrow, steal from everywhere. China, Korea, look anywhere. And then there's another category of things, which is, of course, India doesn't want to become dependent on, coerced by China. There's some security issues, there are values questions, those are all important questions. But let's start at the heart, which is what can we learn from China, as well as from elsewhere in the world. It's not that China has all the solutions to everything.
Just moving away a little bit from the economics, Supriya Chaudhary has asked, does this new dynamic point to a more assertive China, or are there reasons to think China is responding to the change of the status quo in Kashmir? Of course, he's referring to a few months ago, India has taken some very bold actions in Kashmir and said this is very much part of us and we're not letting go. What do you think about that, Matthew?
It's a complex question because obviously China is extremely interested in states which have to deal with what could be perceived almost as insurgent zones, and states which assert in some sort of, in this case, I think very effective, if inevitably quite daunting way, control over those zones. And the obvious parallel is in Xinjiang and Tibet. So from that point of view, the way that Xi Jinping, I think, reacted initially to the new arrangements in Kashmir was quite nuanced and quite complex in terms of how it played in his relationship with India and the Indian leadership. That said, if we are to learn from China, as our colleague said, we have to wonder why it is that they end up putting over 1 million people in labor camps in a Muslim zone. I don't think India would do that. I don't think anyone should do it. And I don't think there's a very good lesson to anyone from that precedent. So let's, horses for courses. Let's learn from China when they're doing something that we can see the point of and that the moral compass behind it is something we would aspire to. And when it isn't, then don't. Because my goodness me, you will, as Andrew said, be stealing business advantage, quite literally. Huawei will do that in India. So look forward to that side of things. You are unwelcome as a competitor and you will be perceived as a competitor. Better get ready for it.
And just staying on that note, Siju has asked, in the long run, would the restoration of Tibet as a buffer state be the only way long-term stable relations could develop between India and China?
May I speak to that? Yes, thank you. It isn't going to happen, I'm sorry to say. China doesn't do buffer states of that sort. China buys Nepal.
Andrew.
I would just add to that, A, I agree completely with Matthew, it's not going to happen. Secondly, the degree of interaction and challenge is much more complicated than that because it comes through the technology, it comes through what diplomats are saying, it comes from deals behind closed doors. and it's coming from all directions because of the interconnected nature of the world. It's a sort of bilateral buffer state. Has a very limited appeal, a very limited value, even if it were to happen, which it won't.
Can I just add to some of these?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to take one of the questions that you had earlier about, India expanding its size of its army. I really hope we don't do some of these things, and I really hope we stop such thinking. We need to move from a manpower-focused force to a firepower-focused force. We need to move beyond, and it's extremely challenging to do this given what's happened. Just look at the last week with Nepal, with Pakistan, with China. But we need to look beyond the land and the continental defense strategy to expanding maritime power. That's essential for us. I really hope we start focusing on those instead. The other point about Kashmir and how China perceived what was done with regard to Article 370, my sort of reading of this is that, look, it took them some time to grasp what exactly it meant, just as it took some time for people in India to actually grasp what it meant. But I think China's response was categorical and fairly harsh. It took Kashmir to the UN a couple of times. It raised human rights issues in Kashmir while Xinjiang was a massive problem. And India was waffling on Xinjiang. So I think the Chinese actually were far harder. They were very clear with the Pakistanis in their statements, which clearly said that, look, we will be standing up for you in international fora, and they did that. So I don't think we should be under any illusions that they didn't see that as a problem. Is the current conflict and the current skirmishing on the LAC related to that? I think that requires some serious tea leaf reading. Assessing Chinese intentions is not going to be, it's not necessarily one thing. It's not that one decision that precipitated this. It's a set of things. But I think that the Chinese reaction to that was categorical. It was harsh. It just took time and played out in different formats.
So Manoj, staying with you, when Modi and Xi Jinping next speak to each other on a call, what do you think they will speak about? What are the top 3 items on the list?
I hope they're not deciding where to hold the next informal summit. But the fact is that, look, and this is, to me, this is disappointing. As somebody who watches China from an Indian perspective, this is really disappointing that we've had a pandemic unfold since March, a pandemic, but since January, the situation in China, and we've not had one conversation between Modi and Xi Jinping. This is not engagement. In that time, Xi Jinping has spoken to Vladimir Putin a couple of times, Angela Merkel 3 times. There's been deep conversations with different leaders. He's even spoken to Donald Trump, which is understandable. But we've not had a single conversation between these 2 leaders, and I think that's a problem. I think if they speak the next time, I really hope they actually set up a formal mechanism for dialogue which requires foreign ministers and diplomats and sort of deeper military engagement over a period of time. I am somebody who believes that we've been far too suspicious, and that's fine. You need to verify given your mutual distrust, but we need to deepen engagement because we don't necessarily understand each other very well, despite being neighbors. Our militaries need to be far more deeply engaged, apart from that one military exercise that we do every year, the hand-in-hand drills. We need to be actually sending cadets to be learning from each other in our military academies. You need to be establishing those hotlines, which we've been trying to for a very long period of time. And the blame for some of this rests on the Chinese too. They have waffled on some of these decisions for a very long period of time. But I think as India, we need to be pushing for deeper military engagement, deeper diplomatic engagement, and more structural engagement. No unstructured walks around the park. That doesn't help.
Matthew?
I think that the sound of sticks and stones and iron rods is a conversation with Xi Jinping leading it.
We've got a couple of minutes to go. So I'm just going to touch on one of the questions and then come to Partha first for some summary comments and then others. Sumita has asked, is India's diplomatic policy failing in general? Because even with Nepal, India's relationship has become strained. And then the other one I just want to touch on, and this is a much broader point from Sunil Muralidhar Shastri in London, I think, is how can India go from its current position to a position of real power globally? So Partha, do you want to address maybe one or both of them and also give some summary comments on this topic? And then after that, Andrew, Manoj, and Matthew.
Thank you very much. I mean, obviously, we have covered a lot of grounds, and it's not easy to cover two most populated countries of the world, India and China, with so many complexities. But what I would like to sort of encourage all of us, and particularly myself, is that, there are several dimensions. So to call out China, what China is doing wrong, that's why China is bad. We have to call out every country on the basis of their strengths. What are they doing right? It's particularly when a country like India is at a very early, still at a very early stage of development. I often use one chart, which is very interesting, where I plot the GDP per capita over the last 70 years. And if you now, of Japan, how Japan has moved from 1945 till today. And then I plot on that chart, where are the countries positioned now? So interestingly, China now is positioned where Japan is to be in 1965. India is positioned where Japan is to be right after the war, 1946. So there's a gap right there of 20 years between China and India on the Japan curve. And there's a gap between Japan and the developed world, China and the developed world, which is about 30 years. So China obviously would have economic aspiration. It would do few things right, few things wrong. And what was wrong, we should obviously detest. What is right, we should learn and welcome. Even the US has got to learn a lot from China. US is falling behind China in AI, in genomics, in many other areas. And what I'm encouraging the US leadership, because I'm also working in some of the discussions here, that how should US think of a global strategy? So one dimension is pure socioeconomic strategy. How do we want to engage with the world socioeconomically? And we have to get prepared for it. And India is not doing well on that dimension. The second dimension is diplomacy. Now, diplomacy, how much you could exert your power largely depends upon your socioeconomic power. And there you have to have an independent point of view. If you have the socioeconomic power, you could exert that more powerfully. If you don't, you have to be very intelligent about it, very surgical about it. And I go back to the Tokyo trials. Tokyo trials, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, but after the war, when Japan was being tried as a criminal of war, there was one person from India. I don't know whether you guys know, he was a barrister or a judge in the Calcutta High Court, Mr. Radhaminod Pal. He was one judge versus 11 other judges from all over the world, but he was able to turn around the thinking in that discussion and save Japan. Now, what I'm trying to get at, I think India has to demonstrate its intelligence and sharpness of thinking in diplomacy. It cannot exert power. I fully agree with Manoj. It's not a matter of expanding our military power. It's a matter of being intelligent. And if one thing all of us should be proud of India, the whole world should be proud of India, is India's Vedic philosophy. How to bring the ancient philosophies of harmony, of love, of intelligence, of affection, and create a global harmony. And that's where India has to play. It doesn't need power, it needs wisdom. And India has not been able to firstly harness that wisdom that we have resident in our ancient philosophies, which Tagore did, Vivekananda did. But today's world is today's India, is totally devoid of making efforts to connect. So that's the second dimension. So diplomacy should be wisdom-based diplomacy, not military-based. And the third dimension, which is, I think, the most important dimension, holding India together. If you talk to people who are growing up in Bombay, their thinking today is very different from someone growing up in Coimbatore versus someone growing up in Guwahati. And somehow today is India, when people think of India, they say Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi. That's not even 1% of India. So I think we have to, in India, have to develop a much more inclusive understanding. And in that spirit, I think We have to see what are the things we could learn from the West, learn from the East, as opposed to importing solution. We have to import problem-solving mentality, problem-solving attitude, problem-solving.
Partha, I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative to say we're just running short on time, and I want to get
No, I've just
the other
finished.
panelists as well.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, 30 seconds from you.
Sure. I mean, following on quite a bit from Partha, actually, that how does India generate that power? It's at its root economic success, and picking up some of the lessons we talked about. It's also, though, having an appealing, attractive point of view to others in the world, and working with others in the world who have that same interest and appeal to get scale, in a sense, against those who have a different point of view. And clearly, we've been talking a lot about China, but it's not just China on some of those dimensions. I saw India has, in the past year or so, surpassed Britain in terms of GDP, and Britain sitting here with a much smaller population, but also saying, well, what can we do about China? How do we have influence? We decided to leave the European Union. How do we nonetheless reach out and create partnerships, work with what are being called middle powers across Asia to have greater alignment? And Matthew's point about, I can't remember the word, not camps, but something else, cultures or agreements with the similarities that come back.
Shared interests.
And common interests. And I think working on that and recognizing there's a lot of internal contradictions here in any country. And some of those contradictions are especially extreme with China, because it's the country that's both a great track record on financial foreign direct investment, it's got Xinjiang camps, which are appalling, and it's got its own attempts to engage globally, some of which are good and productive, some of which create dependencies in any country that then seeks to benefit from them. I'll leave it there.
Manoj?
Hi, thank you so much. So I had just three small points. One was that, look, we need to focus on our economic development, and for that, we need to have a global outlook. We cannot be looking inward. So whatever Atmanirbhar Bharat eventually turns out to be, I hope it doesn't turn out to be import substitution and autarky. We need to be engaged with the world. That will determine our future. Our relationship with China will remain volatile. It is in our interests that we try our best to contain that volatility. And it's going to be a difficult process to actually do that. One way to do that is to raise the costs of conflict for China. And that again requires global partnerships, but also sort of creating our own domestic capacity. And that ties into the first point. Lastly, and I want to sort of make this point because I've not spoken about this at all, like Matthew has spoken, values are important. India is a democracy. India, while democracy promotion might not be our prerogative at this point of time, we need to cultivate and preserve those values within India. And I think that's critical to how our future, sort of how we develop in the future.
And Matthew?
Thank you. Well, I'm rather a fan of Atmanirbhar Bharat because I think it's very similar to what's going on in a lot of other developed and developing countries where people are thinking not in terms of isolating themselves and self-sufficiency purely, but in terms of a new kind of interdependency that diversifies dependencies that have had perverse consequences. And I think there are huge opportunities for India in this regard. I think that India offers, as we've seen already with the pharmaceutical industry, although what is extraordinary is the degree to which India has discovered its own dependency on China for some of the precursor materials. That is the sort of way in which I think by joining a world of many different countries who realize that other economies have great strengths where they have weaknesses or gaps, and by a new set of interconnectivities in a real free trade sense, not simply buying Huawei because it's been sponsored up to 30% below its proper price by a hostile state, but because people can make things that are fairly priced and fairly competitive and do a really good job of it. India has huge potential there, and that seems to me to be what is the most positive aspect of this program. It's to think about paying less for weapons, make your own, good. All for that, but it isn't just about the big ticket reduction in costs. It's about how to energize manufacturing where India has materials and a capacity. And this is not about cheap labor, mark you. This is about very clever young executives, highly trained people who are very good at selling a bargain, or not a bargain, selling that even better. That's all there. It's all waiting. And in a new world where we'll all be thinking about sourcing chains in a majorly new way, let's think about India and let India think of us as buyers.
Thank you, everybody. Last few minutes, we've had a flood of comments coming through. We won't be able to take all of them, but just commenting on some of them. Praveen Amin said, could India bring some counterbalance by having more of an association with Taiwan and South Korea and some of the other countries bordering China? Bipin from Bolton says, Boris Johnson has just stated its global strategy is to trade with the Commonwealth partners much more. How does global Britain feed into all of this? And we've had a number of other questions coming through as well. Sorry, we aren't able to take all of them, but this has been a fascinating discussion. To all the attendees, please continue this conversation on Facebook Live, on our Facebook page. You can comment and you can answer each other's questions. Our next session is on food security in India with Niti Aayog and a number of agri-tech entrepreneurs as well joining as speakers, both from India as well as from the UK and more widely. Please do join us for that. And thank you very much to Andrew, to Manoj, to Matthew, and to Partha. See you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.